An old man went out for a morning walk on a quiet street in Beijing early in the morning, but after going a short distance, a strong stench filled the air. The air was heavy with an acrid, nauseating stench, mingling with the unsettling growls of stray dogs circling nearby. Drawn by their frantic agitation, the man hesitated, his curiosity battling a growing sense of dread. Slowly he approached. The closer he got, the sharper the unease clawed at him. Then he saw it. Under the shadow of the fox tower lay the mutilated body of a young woman. Her lifeless form, twisted and broken, was a vision of unimaginable brutality. The man stood frozen, his breath catching in his throat. Then in a burst of panic, he turned and fled, his feet pounding the ground as he raced to the nearest police station. An old man went out for a morning walk on a quiet street in Beijing early in the morning, but after going a short distance, a strong stench filled the air. The air was heavy with an acrid, nauseating stench, mingling with the unsettling growls of stray dogs circling nearby. Drawn by their frantic agitation, the man hesitated, his curiosity battling a growing sense of dread. Slowly he approached. The closer he got, the sharper the unease clawed at him. Then he saw it. Under the shadow of the fox tower lay the mutilated body of a young woman. Her lifeless form, twisted and broken, was a vision of unimaginable brutality. The man stood frozen, his breath catching in his throat. Then in a burst of panic, he turned and fled, his feet pounding the ground as he raced to the nearest police station. The police arrived swiftly, but even they, hardened officers accustomed to the grim realities of their work, were unprepared for the sheer savagery before them. The girl's body was a tapestry of violence, knife wounds carved across every inch of her skin, her face grotesquely disfigured as though someone had sought to erase her very identity. Her clothing lay in tatters, barely covering her battered form. When officers unzipped her jacket, the horror deepened. Her chest had been grotesquely torn open, her heart and other organs removed with chilling precision. Yet eerily there was no blood, no sign of the violence that must have unfolded elsewhere. The body had been transported here, placed with a sinister deliberation beneath the looming fox tower. As investigators stood in stunned silence, a crowd began to gather, whispers growing louder with every passing moment. From the throng, a man stumbled forward, his face ashen, his steps faltering as he approached the body. Then he fell to his knees, his anguished cries tearing through the air. The man was Edward Werner, the young woman's adoptive father. His grief was raw, visceral, as he clutched her lifeless body and sobbed uncontrollably. Through his tears, he revealed that Pamela had vanished the night before. The murder was a riddle shrouded in terror. Who could commit such a heinous act? What motive could drive someone to such inhuman savagery? And why leave her body here beneath the tower as if staging a macabre display? As the investigation began, the city of Beijing held its breath. Fear rippled through its streets, and the name Pamela Werner became a haunting symbol of unanswered questions and unfathomable cruelty. Edward Werner. I searched for her all night, desperate to find her, but there was no sign of her. Then, this morning, I heard the news. A girl's body had been discovered. I rushed to see if it was her. The moment I laid eyes on her, my heart shattered. It was my Pamela, my daughter. Edward's words carried the weight of a shattered soul as he recounted his story. He spoke of the life he had built in China, a life filled with love, a devoted wife, and dreams of a perfect family. But fate had other plans. Edward learned his wife could never have children, a revelation that left them heartbroken. Yet together they made a profound choice to adopt. Their search led them to a small orphanage where a little girl with bright, curious eyes immediately captured their hearts. She was perfect. They named her Pamela Werner, and from the moment she joined their family, she became their everything. Edward Werner. She wasn't just an adopted child. She was my daughter, my pride, my joy, my reason to wake up every day. For years, their lives were filled with happiness. But tragedy struck again when Pamela was just 5 years old. Edward's wife passed away, leaving him to raise their little girl alone. Determined to shield Pamela from further pain, he poured all his love into being both her mother and her father. Despite the loss, Edward ensured Pamela's world remained bright. As a wealthy man deeply involved in politics, he gave her every opportunity to thrive. Pamela grew into a spirited young woman, kind-hearted, independent, and fiercely determined. She was known for her radiant smile and a generosity that touched everyone who knew her. On January 7th, 1937, Pamela spent the day ice skating with two close friends. They laughed, skated, and shared stories, losing track of time until the sky grew dark and the winter air turned bitterly cold. As they packed up to leave, her friends hesitated. "Friend, it's freezing out there. Aren't you scared to ride home alone?" Pamela simply smiled, her confidence unwavering. "Fear isn't something I was raised with. My father taught me to be strong. I'll be home before you know it." With that, she picked up her bicycle and disappeared into the night, her figure fading into the shadows. It was the last time anyone saw Pamela alive. Edward sat on the sofa, glancing nervously at the clock. It was 8 p.m., and Pamela still hadn't returned. Minutes turned to hours, and his worry deepened. By midnight, dread had taken hold. Where was she? What had happened to his beloved daughter? Unbeknownst to Edward, a nightmare was unfolding, one that would change his life forever. The night was growing darker, and Pamela still hadn't returned home. Panic began to set in as Edward's concern deepened. Desperate, he called for his servant and urgently asked him to check the ice skating rink where Pamela had been earlier. Hours dragged on, and when the servant finally returned, he brought disturbing news. Neither Pamela nor her friends were there, and no one had seen them on the way. With his fear escalating, Edward grabbed his flashlight, his hands shaking, and rushed into the night. He combed the streets, scanning every shadowed alley, calling out for his daughter. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. The hours dragged on, and by morning, there was still no sign of her. Just as his hope began to wane, a news report caught his ear. There had been a body found near the Fox Tower. Edward's heart froze. Could it be her? Despite his desperate hope that it wasn't, Edward knew he had to go. With a heavy heart, he pushed through the growing crowd until he saw the lifeless form of a young woman. Her body was covered, but the golden hair, it was unmistakable. In that moment, Edward's worst fear was confirmed. The body was Pamela's. The police began their investigation, and what they uncovered only deepened the horror. Pamela's skull had been crushed by a heavy object, a brutal sign of her final moments. After her death, her shoulders had been broken and her body mutilated with precision. The autopsy revealed that a 10-centimeter sword had been used to slice her open. The meticulous nature of the dissection led the police to believe that the killer had some form of surgical knowledge. Whispers began to spread through the neighborhood, rumors and accusations swirling around Edward. His intelligence, his academic success, these became twisted in the minds of others into signs of something darker. His inability to control his temper was cited as evidence of a man capable of such violence. But when Edward saw his daughter's body, his reaction was anything but calculated. His grief was raw, visceral, an anguish that could not be faked. The police, initially swayed by the accusations, saw his genuine sorrow. After searching his home, they found no evidence connecting him to the crime, and Edward was cleared of suspicion. But the passage of time did nothing to soothe Edward's pain. As the investigation stalled, fading from public view, he refused to let go of his daughter's memory. His grief transformed into a relentless drive for justice. He repeatedly pressed the authorities, demanding answers that seemed to slip further away with each passing day. The police, indifferent to his cries, seemed content to let the case wither into obscurity. Unwilling to accept this, Edward took matters into his own hands. He launched his own investigation, determined to find the truth no matter the cost. His suspicions led him to believe that the killer must be someone wealthy, someone with the means to take Pamela's expensive diamond ring, which had remained on her finger after her death, never removed. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Edward offered a generous reward for any information that would lead to the identity of his daughter's killer. He fought to have the case reopened, but his petitions were repeatedly denied. Each setback only fueled his determination. Desperate, Edward hired private detectives and increased the reward. Soon people came forward, some with tall tales, others with fragments of truth. He pored over every lead, every scrap of information, hoping for a breakthrough. And then a breakthrough came. A woman named Mary, a prostitute with a questionable reputation, stepped forward. She had information that could change everything. She revealed that on the day of Pamela's murder, Mary, in the darkest corners of the city, there was a place where fear hung in the air like a thick fog, where only the most dangerous and unsavory individuals dared to tread. That day, I had no choice but to work there. It was then that I saw her, a blonde-haired girl walking alongside 3 men, all of them carrying an air of menace. The moment I laid eyes on her, I recognized her instantly. It was Pamela. Among the men was Prentice, a dentist known for luring young women who worked at his clinic to his notorious parties. But these weren't the kind of parties people spoke of in polite conversation. At Prentice's gatherings, he subjected the women to unspeakable horrors, coercing them into silence with threats and violence. The tale of Pamela's murder. Mary recounting her tale. Mary, I often went to Prentice's house, distracting him while he indulged his sickening desires. He had a collection of knives, all labeled for hunting, though what he truly hunted were vulnerable girls. When I saw Pamela with him that day, I knew something terrible was going to happen, but I couldn't stop it. Soon after, they took her upstairs. Then I heard 2 blood-curdling screams, screams I'll never forget. I knew it was her. Mary, then there was a thud, a loud crash like someone had fallen. I knew then Pamela was dead, and I was terrified. But Mary wasn't the only one who witnessed what had transpired that night. Another woman, a prostitute who frequented the same areas, corroborated Mary's account, confirming Edward's worst fears. With this new information, Edward felt a surge of determination. He now had a lead. Prentice had killed his daughter, but a lead alone wasn't enough. He needed concrete evidence. Edward decided to visit a rickshaw driver who had been questioned by the police earlier. Though he had offered little useful information, Edward believed the driver knew more. At first, the rickshaw driver hesitated, but after some prodding, he broke down, his voice filled with dread. "Rickshaw driver, I saw her. I saw the blonde girl, Pamela. She came with 3 men. One of them was Prentice. They went inside together, and 2 hours later, the men came back out, carrying her. Her eyes were closed, her face covered, and there was blood dripping from her body. They forced me to take her body to a desolate place. They threatened me, told me if I spoke, I'd end up like her. I had no choice. I did as they asked, and left." This new evidence was the final piece of the puzzle for Edward. He was now certain Prentice had killed Pamela. The brutal reality of the dentist's predatory actions began to surface. He lured innocent girls into his parties to exploit them, and on that fateful night, he had taken Pamela's life. Prentice had claimed he was at the movies the night Pamela was murdered, but Edward's investigation had revealed the truth. No movie had been playing that evening. Prentice had lied, and now there was no escape for him. Relentless and undeterred, Edward filed yet another petition to reopen the case, his resolve stronger than ever. He would stop at nothing to ensure Pamela's murderer was brought to justice. The fight for truth and retribution had only just begun. He presented the evidence, revealing the terrifying truth. The day Pamela went to the doctor for her dental checkup, he laid his disgusting eyes on her. He tricked her into attending a party, and she, unfortunately, fell for it. Once there, the 3 men seized her, took her upstairs, and struck her on the head with a heavy object, causing her death right then and there. Terrified, the men now had to figure out how to cover their tracks. They disfigured her face, tore off her clothes, and sexually abused her. Then they discarded her body under the Fox Tower. Despite all the evidence and witnesses ready to testify, the case was never opened. The doctor had strong connections with the government, which led to Pamela's case being ignored. Edward fought relentlessly to seek justice for his daughter. He compiled a 150-page document filled with crucial evidence, and the witnesses stood by him. Yet despite all of this, the case was never heard. It was not opened because Plattus was very powerful and had links with the government, due to which no case was being heard against Edward. His daughter never got justice, and this case is still going on today. It remains a mystery because despite having proof, the government is not doing anything. And you people tell me what should be done with such people and such government. You people must give me your opinion about this case in the comments, and that is all for today's story. If you have come to this channel for the first time, then subscribe to the channel. If you like the video, then like and share it, and see you soon with another such interesting case.